computadores.
Helena,
let's check the sequence.
Eu por volta de 12h15, mais ou menos, vou ter que sair. Portanto, é só para dizer...
Não, mas vamos começar.
15, 12h20 no máximo.
Tá bem, tá bem. Deixem-me só, let us just check whether the order is okay. We would start with 15 minutes each of the speakers. Huseyin Bagci would be the first one, then this is the order of the program. Then General Luís Valenga Pinto, Maria Raquel Freire, and Nuno Severiano Teixeira. Unfortunately, as you also know, we cannot have Rafael, Calduch, Cervera with us, so we have a little bit more time, but I would ask you to keep and to your time, to the 15 minutes, so that we can then have a debate. And I'll keep in mind that Professor Nuno Severiano Teixeira will have to leave us at 12:15 or 12:20. Okay, so I think it's 2 minutes past 11. We have already a few participants with us. So I will start. It is my great. Are you listening to me well? It's okay? Are you listening to me? Okay, okay. So it is a great pleasure for me as Director of the National Defense Institute to be chairing this high-level panel discussion on NATO's challenges in view of the future strategic concept. I am really pleased to be here. I'm grateful to the organizers for this invitation, and I will shortly present our panel. Professor Huseyin Bagci is a professor at the Department of International Relations at the Middle East Technical University in Turkey. He is also, I hear, the president, or recently, the president of the Turkish Foreign Policy Institute. Right. And we have with us General Luís Valenga Pinto. Is a professor at the Autonomous University of Lisbon, and also at the Institute for Political Studies at the Catholic University of Lisbon. Is a retired general of the Portuguese Army and is a former head of staff of the Portuguese Armed Forces. Then Professor Maria Raquel Freire, she's a professor of international relations at the economics faculty of the University of Coimbra. And last but not least, Professor Nuno Severiano Teixeira, professor at the Faculty of Social Sciences of the Nova University of Lisbon, and he is also the director of the Portuguese Institute for International Relations. As I was saying before, and for all those who have joined us in the meantime, unfortunately, we will not have Professor Rafael Calduch Cervera from the Complutense University because he was asked to participate in a high-level council at his university, and he apologizes for being absent. Before giving the floor to our speakers, I will just make a couple of announcements. The first one is that this session is being recorded, and the video will be made available after this conference at the website of the organizations, the organizers. And those of you who would not want to be recorded, you can just eliminate the video and that will be okay. The second announcement is that everybody should intervene or participate in the debate that will follow orally, and we would like to see you, unless of course you prefer not to, and please use the chat only to register for the debate. So I think that's it for the technical announcements. I will not spend any more time with more introductions. So I will give the floor to Professor Huseyin Bagci and ask him to keep to his 15 minutes, please. I will check on each one of you.
Please do. Thank you very much. First of all, good morning to everybody. I hope it will be a very fruitful discussion. The topic is interesting. The issues are very challenging, and you can record me, no problem. And I'm also very happy to see friends as participants, and it will be a good, I will say, intellectual discussion. First of all, the topic, NATO, challenges, strategic issues, how this situation is seen from Turkey. As a Turkish academic, how I do interpret the events will be my issue. First of all, the transatlantic relations have never been so bad as it is now concerning the discussions. I'm not talking about the military structures, existing diplomatic and all type political relations, but it was not so much discussed as it is now, whether NATO should survive, or is it an obsolete mechanism, or it is brain dead mechanism, as Macron and Trump used to say. In the last 4 years, actually, when I do look to the discussions, the transatlantic relations suffered a lot. Maybe the most important issue is here. Brexit played also an important role, that Britain now out of European Union, but as a military power, it is there, and we see here a weakening of European Union as an institution, militarily speaking, because after Britain is out, then suddenly the European Union security is depending on 4 external powers: America, Great Britain, Russia, and Turkey. So this is a new phenomena, and how we deal with these responsibilities of NATO challenges in the coming years important, because the classical principle of NATO has been the Americans in, the Soviets out, and the Germans down. So it was the idea of NATO to be established. But more important, later on, it became that for all for one and one for all. The question is, after the end of the Cold War, NATO in the 90s and early 2000s tried to become a global power, a global organization, but it couldn't be. It's still a regional organization within the United Nations Article 51, but we have difficulties to define who is the enemy. There is no enemy anymore in ideological sense, and Russia comes here now as a new challenge, I would say, for NATO, concerning the Crimea, concerning the Ukraine, and now also concerning the Baltic states. So the Russian security policy and foreign policy is going to become more important in the long run if, I would say, what happens in Belarus, it will also have automatic impact on the Central European countries to European countries at all. I think looking from a Turkish perspective, the Turks have been anyway very much disappointed in recent years because the Central and Eastern European countries who have never been part of NATO after until the end of the Cold War, that they joined the European Union, but Turkey was and is out of the European Union, despite the fact that contributed a lot for the security of Europe. Now, this disappointment, at the moment at least, we observe that more and more political debate in Turkey in recent years take place. Should Turkey leave NATO? What is if Turkey leaves NATO? Even within the NATO circles, among the European intellectuals as well as some Americans, they suggest that Turkey is a bad guy now. Turkey should be out of NATO because Turkey buys Russian weapons. S-400, I mean here. So the Turkish-Russian relations in the military sense developed in the recent years, despite the fact that in 2015, the shutdown of the Russian plane created a very big crisis between Turkey and Russia, but now the problem is settled. And S-400 missile system is, do you know how much distant from me? Just 6 kilometers. From my room to S-400s are 6 kilometers here. Whether, should I feel myself more secure than the American Patriots, or should I feel that S-400s provide me this security is an open question, although they are not yet, of course, totally in function, but they are on the way to be installed. It's very interesting. It will be debated maybe later on more about this, why Turkey had to buy Russian missiles, but not only Turkey, of course, several other countries buy Russian S-400 missiles. It is another debate, but this is creating a big problem between Turkey and the United States of America bilaterally, and creates another debate within the NATO structures. In Turkish debate, very interestingly, that NATO does a lot of unjust, that NATO is not functioning anymore, it is not solving the problems, increasingly debated, despite the fact that I say that Turkey will not leave NATO unless NATO is declared dead, nullified, then Turkey cannot do anymore. Then we all put NATO into the graveyard somewhere in Europe. Then Turkey probably will carry the coffin, but Turkey will be not the country which will leave NATO by herself, by her own decision. The reason is very simple. NATO is the only international institution where Turkey has the veto right. As we know, any NATO decision needs unanimity. So from this perspective, like in the case of Southern Republic of Cyprus issue, Turkey blocks, of course, the membership of Southern Republic of Cyprus, as they block certain issues in the Mediterranean, in the Aegean, as recently we saw. But the basic question is NATO needed? The answer is yes. How NATO will develop is another issue which will be definitely discussed, because NATO, as we see in the recent years, also in migration issues, it played an important role in the Mediterranean and in Aegean Sea, making control, surveillance together with some countries' navy, and also concerning the Middle East conflict, when ISIS was much more effective in the 2013-14, in the NATO meeting in Wales, NATO decided that ISIS is a common threat. And there, Turkey took automatically side of NATO and declared the war against ISIS. Later on, Turkey became subject or target of Daesh attacks in Turkey. And in Turkey, we have thousands of Daesh militants now in prisons, or they are very strongly controlled, protected. It became territorially speaking, a big problem for Turkish security, and probably it will also continue in the long run. But the public survey in Turkey in recent years, there are many public surveys, even two academics. One is from Kadir Has, Louis Tome knows him, Mustafa Aydın, and from my department, just my neighbor opposite, Özgen Şanyuva. They published a wonderful survey. What is the intellectual estimation, the intellectuals' view towards NATO. This is a public survey, well done, I would say, and it shows not only man on the street, but also the intellectuals, journalists, diplomats, politicians, how they consider NATO. I think NATO has a credibility problem at the moment. This is important, but not only NATO, also European Union has some credibility problems. This is the spirit of time in German zeitgeist, that the international institutions established after the World War II at the moment cannot answer the demands, the expectations in security field as they have they are expected to do actually, but it is not the case. From Turkish perspective, therefore, we have very interesting situation. The anti-NATO feelings increase, but the government does not take those views into account and says, no, we will stay in NATO. And I think it is also in the Turkish security interest that NATO still is the only military structure which provides Turkey certain security guarantees, despite the fact in recent years the Turkish-NATO relations also suffered like Turkish-American relations suffered bilaterally. Now, my idea would be here to say, is Turkey changing direction? Is Turkey getting more closer to Russia? I don't think so. First of all, Turkey remains anchored in the Western structures. With Russia, temporarily, Turkey had good relations, also did buy these anti-missile systems because the Americans did not sell Turkey Patriots. Turkey was demanding from the very beginning, and Turkey was looking for diversification for the security of her own. And also, it is important to know that Americans recently also kicked out, if you want, Turkey from F-35 jet fighters project, which created here a great anti-American feelings in Turkey. So we are members of NATO, but the Americans will be called as imperialist. So it is a very interesting statement. On the table, we talk about the common security problems, but the public in Turkey very angry with this two decisions not to sell Patriots and to get Turkey out of F-35 project, despite the fact that Turkey paid all the money. It reminds, of course, Turkey to, in the previous decades, to the American embargo, in the sense of military embargo in 1964, 65, and then in 1975, 78. Also recently, Americans made a very strategic decision, including Iran. 7 countries, Muslim countries, are considered as the terrorist-producing countries. Turkey was not taken in, it is right so, because Turkey is, to my mind, for NATO, not a security-consuming country, but a security-providing country. So Turkey is necessary for the entire regional developments in the Middle East, in the Mediterranean, on the Black Sea, and of course on the Balkans and Central Europe. So my expectation is what type of challenges NATO will face in the long run, and how NATO can be more effective in certain conflict resolution issues. It is an open question. We have to wait first how the American elections will go, one, whether Trump is in power or not. If Trump is in power, I do expect that the transatlantic relations will have another dimension, as your country, also Turkey, had to increase 2% of GDP for more defense purposes. For Turkey, it makes around $30 billion in the long run. So some other countries, smaller countries, will also pay additionally concerning their GDP. But the main question is, can NATO survive without America? This is the question. Can we provide European security without America, or are the Europeans be able to provide the security for themselves? I think the outgoing of Great Britain, it made European security nearly 40% weaker. In budget terms, 15%. This is why the only European power at the moment which has warship, it is France. France suddenly appears as the most strongest military power, having nuclear weapons, having warships, and being member of United Nations Security Council. Which country is the most richest one? Germany. Germany does not have nuclear weapons. Germany does not have warship. Germany is a giant in economic terms, but a dwarf in military terms. Even the military structures of Germany had to be renewed. A renaissance is asked for the German military. They made a big mistake, I would say, before, because they got the military service not as obligatory, but made it now by choice. So it was a wrong decision. They are not able to find enough soldiers. So Germany suffers under this, and I follow also the German security debate because of my education in Germany. But Germany is the most important payer and the most important country to rely on the American security umbrella, I mean nuclear weapons. Now,
Professor, the 15 minutes are over, but I can give you a couple more
then
minutes.
I stop here. Sorry, when I do start to teach, I cannot stop myself, so thank you.
2 minutes.
Later in question and answer period, maybe I can answer. But one sentence, with your permission. Is NATO necessary? The answer is yes. Will NATO solve the problems which will emerge as new challenges? There I have some doubts and see certain difficulties if NATO continues to be in this time, in this intellectual turmoil and military difficulties.
Thank you so much, Professor Huseyin Bagci. Very challenging, important questions. I will give now the floor to General Luís Valença Pinto. The floor is yours, General.
Okay. Good morning to everybody. I hope you are listening me. Okay, I compliment all the participants with special greetings to my distinguished colleagues in this panel. It is indeed for me a pleasure and a distinction to have been invited to participate in this high-level conference. The topic of our round table suggests the idea of a renewed NATO strategic concept, and quite wisely, it associates the notion of challenges. Theoretically, we may think of many subjects to be considered in a new NATO strategic concept that will prove to be very challenging. I agree to that idea, but there is a previous but absolutely fundamental challenge to be taken into consideration. What I am referring to, it is to the likeliness of a new NATO strategic concept in the near future. Is it possible? At what cost? I was privileged enough to have significantly participated with a Portuguese hat in the intense discussions that led to the approval of NATO strategic concept 1991 and 2010, and although in a more indirect way, also in the running up to the 1999 concept. I am not mentioning this in order to polish my colors. The notion I wish to convey is that those debates are very complex, hard and sensible, require great political and strategic unity of vision, strong commitment, clear identification of the go and no-go lines, flexibility and spirit of compromise. And I do have a strong reservation if whether or not these essential prerequisites are available in the alliance at this very moment. There is not a fixed life cycle for NATO strategic concepts, but when the existing one was approved here in Lisbon in November 2010, the common expectation was that it would be advisable to benefit from a new one by 2020, starting the dialogue in 2019. The time frame of a decade and the recognition of permanent and fast change as an indisputable mark of our time supported that vision. As we all know, that didn't happen. And I'm very happy with that outcome. Why? Because I believe that there were no conditions for such exercise. There were other reasons, of course, but the more relevant one were the peculiar and quasi-disruptive posture of the Trump administration and the turbulence coming out of the Brexit process. Should the alliance have been engaged in such exercise, I very much suspect that it would have not resisted to it. The wise option was, at least for me, to wait for less difficult times within the alliance. And the question is, as of today, can we count on a less stormy and foggy environment within the alliance? My answer is that no, we cannot. And my recommendation continues to be, under such troubling conditions, NATO should not try to revise its strategic concept. Of course, this wait-and-see policy has to have a limit. At least, let's wait until November, and I don't need to justify the date. In the beginning of 2021, the alliance can eventually start efforts to be revitalized, including producing a new strategy, or regrettably, it will have to face a rather gloomy future, if any. Being positive allows me to position myself in the revitalization scenario, and consequently considering as possible and appropriate a new strategy. And for a moment, imagine that I was NATO's Secretary General, tasked to offer North Atlantic Council basic recommendations aiming to the success of the strategic revision. I would formulate those recommendations under two dimensions: methodology and contents. As to the methodology, I would propose to start the exercise with a high-level group, a wise person group, not formally connected with member states, but of course, always open to debate with the nations. I think that at the moment, there are positions so far apart that tackling them from the outset with the member states would be counterproductive and risky. I have mentioned methodology, but in fact, this is a rather political and sensitive issue. Regarding the contents, my wish would be to offer 10 key issues. 10 is always a magic number, but I ended up with 13. I'm sorry for that excess. They represent the substance of the agreement that I take as indispensable, at the same time that with them, I try to look into the future, into the foreseeable future at least. And these would be my 13 major concerns and challenges. First, ensure that democratic values and principles would remain the cornerstone and the fundamental brand of the alliance. Special attention to be given to the current cases of Hungary, Poland, and Turkey. Second, sanitize, revigorate, and relaunch NATO as one of the pillars of the transatlantic link, building up a shared vision based, among other factors, on the importance of multilateralism and cooperation, and on common views on fundamental issues, such as the value of NATO-EU cooperation and the relationship with China and Russia. Third, bring Turkey back to a more consistent and less erratic position. In short, bring Turkey back to a position more in line with NATO commonly agreed policies and practices as a stable, predictable, and less surprising ally. Fourth, having success on the three previous points, and as it is absolutely essential and urgent, re-establishing the alliance a clear and consistent political leadership and guidance, inspired by the ideas of a new multilateralism, in line with UN core values and political principles, open to new actors, including people, and to new phenomena. Fifth, taking into account the difficult financial and economic circumstances that emerged from the pandemic crisis, review the agreement on 2% of national GNPs committed to defense, with 20% devoted to investment, not changing its substance, but eventually accepting a postponement as short as possible of the now established timeline of 2024. 6, deepen and consolidate the relationship and cooperation between NATO and the European Union, aiming to an increased European security responsibility and strategic autonomy, and recognizing the evidence that the political, diplomatic, economic, financial, social, and cultural capabilities of the Union, together with its military dimension, are very valuable and truly indispensable for many security problems affecting NATO, namely in the NATO South region, thus recognizing the European Union as a real and effective security provider. 7, do not make any concessions to Russia, as long as Russia's tragic violations of international law and human rights persist. At the same time, convey the message that the alliance is open to relaunch the NATO-Russia cooperation as soon as those violations will be stopped and amended, eventually in a post-Putin Russia. 6, be more attentive and more assertive on the relationship with China, namely in the fields of weaponry and of technology transfer, to include communications and information systems, and looking forward to a broader coordination with the European Union in what refers to trade with China and to Chinese investment. 9, review the list of threats and risks to pay increased attention to questions such as pandemics, environment, and racial and gender issues. 10, whilst maintaining all the other cooperation connections, reinforce and structure the cooperation with the African Union, the Arab League, and the G5 Sahel group. 11, if they so wish, assist Western Balkan countries still under the umbrella of the Partnership for Peace program on their efforts to join NATO. 12, create within the alliance an organizational frame for a better assessment of the difficult Arctic-related issues, territorial and resources disputes, many of them between NATO allies and some others opposing NATO nations and Russia. 13, and final, allocate high priority to strategic communications. This would be my list. Thank you very much for your attention. Sorry.
Thank you very much, General Luís Valença Pinto. This was a tremendous checklist. You left us all a bit overwhelmed. I think we have a lot of food for thought here. And thank you for being short also. You didn't use all your time. So I'm glad to now give the floor to Professor Maria Raquel Freire. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Helena. Good morning, everyone. I would like to start by thanking the invitation to share this high-level panel with all of you. Thanks so much to the organizers. And in fact, a lot has already been put on the table for discussion. And I would probably start with this issue about whether we need or not a new strategic concept for NATO. And as Mr. General was making his point, in fact, if we are looking at an empty void or a document that will show in the end there is a lot of discord and will not really bring anything new, then NATO might lose a lot. But on the other hand, there is a lot of expectation regarding this issue about this process of reflection that is going on, and at some point eventually getting to a document that should be dense and that should be, to my understanding, an opportunity to show some coherence between NATO members. Anyway, I think this reflection process will take time. Probably I would see it a bit more in the longer term than so it would start to be more seriously discussed in the meantime, but I think probably it would already be the new Secretary General that would kind of follow up on this process. Maybe thinking about the new concept for the celebration of the 75th anniversary of NATO on 2024, who knows, could be a way forward. But indeed, the big issue here is that because of all these differences that we have been talking about among NATO members, this document that should be kind of a mission statement is important at some point. It's a way of reassuring also public opinion and about what NATO is doing, what is its purpose, where it is heading, and what is worried with. So this shouldn't be a document very much worried with the very operational details. These can be agreed as it has always been then at different meetings, at different levels, councils, etc. But having a mission statement that brings some coherence and purpose to the alliance at this particular moment seems to me to be important. So I hope the current reflection process, as it is called, might lead to some document with some substance. Anyway, the threats, as we have been already discussing, as far as are varied, are multiple, are involved more traditional threats as well as cyber threats, non-traditional, non-conventional threats. And for me, in this context, one of the most pressing issues is what I see as the collapse of the arms control regime. So when we think about the treaties, the military treaties, like the ABM treaty or the INF treaty, the CFE treaty, so all these is out of the game for now. So what we have is the new start. So negotiations are on to see if we get to a revised version. But what we see is that what was most important, besides, of course, the concrete limitations that these treaties implied, what is fundamental is the issue about predictability, about transparency, confidence-building measures, the monitoring, and the inspections mechanisms that these treaties allowed, of course, besides all the controls, limits, etc. they imposed. And this is basically not there anymore. And I think it is important, and it's important also for NATO to engage in and push for negotiations to, in a certain way, create the right context, let's say, to revitalize some of these agreements which are so important in terms of arms controls and limitations. So having said this, you clearly see what are my main concerns, let's say, when I look at NATO and thinking about NATO. Clearly we have serious problems internally, that there are disagreements that are undermining coherence. So the US position has already been mentioned when Macron says, talks about NATO is brain dead, and basically saying, let's stop discussing this 2% issue about our defense budgets. Let's talk about what NATO should be doing. There are so many challenges out there. So we have these differences that are very clear. We always have the differences that I think are still not totally managed between the southern dimension and the eastern dimension, and what perceptions of insecurity countries have. So those closer to Russia will see in Russia a major threat. Those closer to the south will look at other kind of threats coming from North Africa, the Mediterranean. And so this is already an old issue inside the Atlantic Alliance, and on top of this we have Trump's administration putting pressure. We have now this issue between Turkey and Greece, and so we have a lot going on, let's say, inside the alliance that needs to be dealt with. But of course, the other dimension I had to bring in, and Huseyin already talked a little bit about the role of Russia in all of these. And Russia is clearly an important actor and factor in all these when we think about NATO. in some way, Russia plays the role of the destabilizer, the revisionist power. There is always criticizing NATO. So NATO should have disappeared with the end of the Cold War, with the end of the Warsaw Pact. So for Russia, NATO is still the enemy. So all the efforts that were made, the creation of the NATO-Russia Council, etc., were never really understood and socialized in Russia as sufficient, let's say, for confidence building. And so Russia keeps in its narrative, in all its military doctrines, in its foreign policy concepts, security documents, mentioning that NATO's enlargement is a main threat, is an external threat to Russia, and uses these images of NATO is encircling Russia, so it's still a very Cold War, geopolitically marked type of discourse and narrative about how Russia feels regarding NATO. And it adds on top of it, so that there are this military power that is closer to its borders, because NATO enlargement, of course, brought NATO closer to Russia's borders. But on top of this, there's also the political argument, and that there is this attempt to pressure for regime change in Russia. And so the whole narrative in Russia is very much against the US, against NATO and the West in general. We know, of course, that what happened in 2004, Ukraine, the annexation of Crimea, only contributed to reinforce the differences and to make all these even more evident. And so this narrative that Russia is excluded from the decision-making processes has also contributed to a lot of the misreadings that we can see in relations between NATO and and Russia. But on the other hand, somehow this Russia factor might have a relevant implication in US policies towards NATO, because there's this discussion about how much the US will retreat from Europe, and because the main issues are now taking place in the Pacific, looking more at Asia. But I would argue that in the current circumstances and how Russia has been positioning itself, this might push for keeping the US presence in Europe for at least the short, medium term. And so in this regard, Russia might work, let's say, as an incentive for an enhanced presence of the US in Europe, given the context of tension and of difference between Russia and the West, and particularly Russia and the US. In face of these, what to do? And I think, General, you did a wonderful job in highlighting all these possibilities and ways ahead. And I'm basically in line with all of these. I would just highlight 2 or 3 ideas connected to some of these issues that I've been highlighted. And first thing would be that the lack of confidence and the credibility gap that exists currently between NATO and Russia in particular has to be addressed in some way. So NATO has to be clear to which is the acceptable scope, let's say, for reenactment of contact. So we know there have been some meetings of the NATO-Russia Council. So since 2016, around 10 meetings. So there is some dialogue going on, but it's still very empty, let's say. So we need dialogue, and this looks like we are always saying this, we are always repeating ourselves, yeah, dialogue is needed, so we need to try to find lines of communication, but indeed this is the baseline. So, and it is needed, to my understanding, to try even to use some non-official means academics can be a good way, these kind of fora can be a good way to try to bring together and try to somehow try to limit miscalculations, misunderstandings, and so this issue clarifying, let's say, how to proceed on the way would be important. So I understand clearly that currently Russia's violations of the European security regime, of human rights, of sovereignty of Ukraine, etc., are a big blocking issue for any progress, but it would be important to reaffirm the relevance of the NATO-Russia Council and how this might be a mechanism somehow to allow to resume and keep some of these contacts going on. And as has been said, working on a positive agenda would probably avoid, let's say, that we lose everyone in this process. And here, working on issues of mutual concern is clearly a way to go forward. And here I would bring again the issue about arms control negotiations, where I think NATO can clearly have some input and push also for these, along with talks about all these current threats that are common and shared also with Russia. So if we talk about transborder issues, if we talk about cybersecurity, counterterrorism, there are a lot of these issues that are on the agenda, that are also on the agenda of dissension between NATO and Russia, but that need to be somehow addressed. And I think I would leave it for now here, and then in the debate, let's see.
Thank you very much also, Raquel, for use shortly, but really raising important questions. Before giving the floor to Professor Nuno Severiano Teixeira, allow me to remind you that if you'd like to intervene or make comments, ask questions, signal that on the chat, and then I will give you the floor. I have already one question there, but I would prefer people to just indicate they would be willing to intervene, and then I'll give you the floor afterwards. So Professor Nuno Severiano Teixeira, the floor is yours. Thank you. You don't have your microphone on. Can you connect your microphone? Yes, okay, now it's okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Helena. I would like to start by thanking the organizers for inviting me, for having me today, and say that it's for me a great pleasure to share this panel with such distinguished colleagues and friends. And well, I think my task is much more easy because almost everything have been said. But anyway, I will try to say something about the topic. Mainly two remarks. The first one, trying to put the question in an historical perspective. And second, one or two comments on the current situation, how I see the current situation of NATO. Well, as we all know, the Atlantic Alliance is the largest, the strongest, and the most enduring alliance between democracies, we must say, between democracies we must underline. And the alliances went through different crises, several crises, but always survived. Changed mission, changed its member states, and always survived. In '49, when the alliance was founded against the Soviet expansionism, the mission was clear. It was a collective defense. It was the center of the Cold War, and it was the basis of the defense of the Western world. No doubt about that. At 40, NATO had his moment of glory. I mean, NATO won the Cold War. And at that time, paradoxically, and I think Raquel said the same, sa raison d'être, the reason of existence disappeared because the threat, the Soviet threat disappeared. And then I remember very well, the American Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger, said, well, NATO cannot go on like this. And NATO has two options: extinguish or transform. NATO choose transformation. And the transformation has two different levels, which were very, very important in the future of the alliance. I mean, at the political level, the enlargement to Central and Eastern Europe, the enlargement to the former enemies of the Warsaw Pact. But at the military level, the alliance changed completely his mission and moved from the defense, the collective defense, to the international security. It was a huge transformation. And the post-Cold War soon offered to the alliance the possibility, the opportunity to perform these new missions: crisis management, peacekeeping operations, and more than this, sometimes peace enforcement cooperations, which was much more complicated in some time. First, in the civil wars, former Yugoslavia, and then in Afghanistan. And I remember very well, because at that time, as Minister of Defense, along with General as Chief of Staff, we followed very closely this kind of missions in ex-Yugoslavia and in Afghanistan. But the success of this kind of missions was different. And in Afghanistan, like a little bit later in Libya, it was not a success. Then the crisis, the malaise, if you allow me to say it in French, began inside the alliance. Then another key date came in 2014. Everything changed with the annexation of the Crimea. Russian revisionism moved from a defensive position to an aggressive strategy. The question of Ukraine and the annexation of the Crimea was the center of this program. Then the old threat returns to Europe. The old threat once the Soviet one, and now the Russians' illiberal nationalism, illiberal authoritarianism. And this changed completely the panorama in Europe and in European security. So NATO had to change again and change the game. It took up the sense of its origins and returned to the core business of the beginnings. I mean, return to the collective defense. But in the collective defense in another way, not only against the traditional threats, but also against the new kind of threats. I mean, a new kind of technological threats, hybrid warfare, cyber warfare, political subversion, aggressive campaigns of fake news by Russian trolls against European institutions, against Western elections. So this changed completely the situation of the Western world and the security in Europe and in the United States. Now, let me move to the current situation. And let me say that nothing of this is new. None of this is new. I mean, these are the traditional external threats that the alliance always faced in its history. What is new? What is new today is the internal threat. I mean, the challenges inside the alliance. There's a friend of mine that used to say that that NATO is in shape, but the alliance is in crisis. I mean, the military structure is fully operational. The military structure is fully responding to their missions. The problem is at the political level. I mean, the crisis is in the political alliance. The political alliance that is paralyzed by, first, the lack of trust among allies. This is the first thing. And then, more than this, the lack, the absence of a real political leadership in the alliance. Absence of leadership because of the American strategic retreat, because of the erosion in the transatlantic link, because of the criticism on NATO, and in particular on the credibility of the Article 5 by President Trump. And of course, all these factors have a huge impact on the trust among the allies. So this is precisely, in my view, what we are witnessing today. And if you look for the tension in the Eastern Mediterranean between Greece and Turkey, and our Turkish colleague can witness this, is this what we are witnessing? I mean, tensions between allies have always been normal in the alliance. Which is new is the lack of leadership to manage the tensions among the allies. So, well, NATO is today facing new challenges. The Secretary General, as we all know, appointed a committee of experts to work on the new strategic concepts. Both of the three presentations have already been dealing with this new kind of strategic concept. But let me focus on not on the technicalities, but on the key question, the political key question that I think the alliance is facing today. So the question is that NATO, the future of NATO, to a large extent depends on the future of the American national strategy and foreign policy. I mean, depends on the future of the next elections in the United States. Because if you have, again, a new Trump administration, I've spoken with some American colleagues, political scientists that follow the question very closely. And they are really afraid in a second term of the President Trump of American withdrawal from NATO. Of course, if the administration is a Biden administration, the situation will be a little bit different, because he will try to reinforce, to restore the transatlantic link and give credibility to the Atlantic Alliance. But anyway, I think we must be aware that being a Trump administration or a Biden administration, the priority for the United States moved from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And I think we have to be aware of this situation. And as during the Cold War, the NATO responded and was formed against the Soviet threat, it's possible, hypothetical, but it's possible, the creation of an Asian NATO in the Pacific against the Chinese threat. I mean, a new alliance between the United States, Japan, South Korea, Australia, even India. So, of course, NATO, if the international liberal order continues, and we would like very much the reinvention, the renewal of the international liberal order, NATO is key, not only for security reasons, but also for the defense of a democratic international order. But I think we have to be aware of these big changes in the international scene and the priority that is moving from the Atlantic to the Pacific. And in that context, I think we have to make an effort to restore not only the trust among all the allies, but also a big effort to restore the transatlantic link in order NATO to be or continue to be relevant in the international scene.
Thank you very much, Professor Nuno Severiano Teixeira. Really challenging views that you brought to this discussion. So the debate promises to be really interesting. I thank you all for having kept your first intervention short. I already have two participants that will pose their questions, but before going to that, I would, in the first round, ask the speakers whether you'd like to comment each other's interventions. So starting with Professor Bagci, for the other speakers' interventions and your possible comments on that. Your microphone needs to be on. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all the contributions were complementary. They supported each other's thesis, more or less. They are not so big controversial, I would say, views at the moment. But in particular, the elections in America, as the last speaker said, will define many things. This is true. America is also involved with China. We will see how this China-American relations will develop, whether it will be at the cost of European security. We will see. Concerning Maria, she in particular emphasized the disarmament talks, NATO's new challenges, also in Black Sea, on the Central Asia. I think it was also a very great picture providing, I would say, presentation. I agree with both of the speakers until now, at most points. What Mr. Pinto said, very militarily structured, well done, 6 points, tack, tack, tack. It was so clear that I can only say one word, what he was mentioning Turkey, that Turkey should do this and that. This is the classical attitude at the moment in Europe among the European intellectuals, that Turkey is a bad guy, that Turkey is creating troubles, etc. One forgets to look from the other side. If two sides are fighting or quarreling, then there should be something, a reason, a potential for conflict. And it's like tango, when the Greeks say, if you make tango, then you need two persons, you know. But if you play sirtaki, the Greeks do it, then you don't need any partner, you know. So, but for tango, you need partner. So I think, is Turkey playing alone, sirtaki, or is it that it takes two to tango? Always, the Turkish side is disappointed, the Turkish public, I was indicating. There is not any other member of NATO which suffered so much under American embargoes. There's not one, except the Southern Europe, Southern Republic of Cyprus. Now Foreign Minister Pompeo also lifted the embargo to the south, but it had another reason for this. But the fact remains, is Turkey needed for NATO? Put the question from the other side. Does Turkey need NATO? Yes. Does NATO need Turkey? I think so. Yes, because Turkey is a stabilizer here in this part of the world, not like in the West, but also in the future. Turkey is the wall, if you want, not Chinese wall, but like a dam which stops the entire migration, except, of course, Mediterranean countries like Spain, like Italy, they have from the seaside, but Turkey has from seaside as well as from the borders. So Turkey has 6 million people at the moment. 4 million of them are the Syrians. And this migration policy, as you know, how the European countries now fighting among each other or having discussions whether Austria should take 100 children or Germany 150. If they take 1,000, it is too much, exceeding their capabilities. If it is the capability, Turkey has 4 million people. It is half of Portugal. The people are here, living here. We pay them. We take them, we pay them security, we pay them healthcare, education. Nearly 600 children, 600,000 children at the moment in Turkey, Syrian origin, go to the school. We provide education. I mean, just taking, like tomato picking, we take 50 children from this camp, 60 children from this one. It is, what is it? I mean, if Turkey opens the border, as we saw this year in February, then there's a real trouble. I was considering, for example, this act just to show Europe the reality on the field. I mean, it was mismanaged. It was very terrible, I can tell you. And you know what? It is exactly my city, Edirne. Ruiz knows this. My city, Edirne, was just on the border to Greece. I mean, in my city, overnight, you know, the people, the city has 200,000 people, and suddenly it became 270,000. The people come like a flood, you know, and even the border crisis you saw. I think, is NATO a military organization? And the last speaker, it was great. It is a political organization now. It is, the military issue is not debated. We have political problems among the NATO countries. This is Article 7, by the way, concerning the values, concerning the togetherness, etc. Last but not least, maybe here, to my mind, Turkey is security providing country for Europe, at all for the West. So if Turkey is unstable, then we have more trouble than Turkey is stable.
Thank you very much, Professor Bagci. General Luís Valença Pinto, for this first round of short comments between yourselves.
Thank you very much. I'll be as short as possible, I promise. Of course, let me express that NATO is and always was a political alliance. It could not be otherwise, because NATO is an organization formed and built by sovereign states. Of course, its more clear expression is of a military nature, but NATO is and always was a political organization. That for me, as it doesn't represent any reason for doubt. NATO, when NATO, and I will take an expression that one of my distinguished colleagues used, when NATO reinvented itself in 1990, this reinvention was very successful, very fast, surprisingly fast, but it was overall accepted. And the output of this reinvention is there. Western Balkans is a clear translation of that. A certain level of success in Afghanistan. On that, I perhaps disagree a little bit with my friend Nuno Severiano Teixeira, my former minister, sir, because really I believe, really, I believe that there was some success out of the Afghanistan campaign. Of course, nothing was completely finished, and we do have a lot of problems down there. On NATO enlargement, I would like to say that NATO didn't decide to enlarge. The open door policy, it is always there. It was always there. What these countries, the countries that were accepted, expressed their willingness to join NATO. And it could not be a surprise. Then when they came out of the Warsaw Pact and of the former Soviet influence, what they most wanted was a security assurance, and that they looked after in NATO. Only afterwards, they looked for European Union for support in political, economic, and social matters, and this, I think, it is quite reasonable. NATO, in 2014, what NATO did was to re-establish the conventional deterrence posture, which very naively, and I was part of that naivety, NATO had put aside in the 2010 concept. In 2010 concept, NATO based collective defense on direct defense, if it was aggressed, and on nuclear deterrence. And that proved to be insufficient. And the proof was in Crimea, Ukraine, and so on and so forth. So in 2014, what NATO did, and quite wisely, was to reinstall NATO collective defense. No, sorry, NATO conventional deterrence. The problem of political leadership is really central. United States were not, for my own experience, a director state in the alliance, but they were always the leading state in the alliance. And now the alliance doesn't have a leader. And this is different. This is totally new. Yes, it's okay. Along the history of the alliance, there were many disputes. Some have always been there. I don't need to recall them. Others are in a coming and going situation. But what never happened was such a dissentment between the two sides of the Atlantic, or at least one nation on the east side on one side of the Atlantic and the European side. And with that, what we got was the absence of political leadership. NATO, for the moment, doesn't have a clear and consistent political leadership. And this leads me to the question of approaching Russia. We all know that Russia is a fundamental cooperation partner for many security dossiers: proliferation, counterterrorism, narcotraffics, environment, and many others. But the problem is that we could think of avenues of approach. I have already heard the suggestion, well, normally the militaries talk easily with each other. So let's give some space for the NATO military leadership to talk with the Russian military leadership. And I will tell you, this is true. Normally the military leadership, even between opposing states, can talk to each other for many reasons, but those talks, those disputes, those discussions have to be based and inspired by a common vision, a common political vision and guidance, and that doesn't exist. No one could tell NATO military how they should engage themselves with Russian military leadership. And this is a very strong limitation in my view. Of course, NATO is needed to all its member nations, and all its member nations are needed to NATO. So the question on whether or not Turkey is needed for NATO, it's clear. Turkey is of course needed to NATO due to its geostrategic position, due to its the strength of its armed forces, but mostly, and overarching all that, by the sharing of political values and principles. And that's what the problem lies today. And we all need to understand the perception that exists outside our own countries if we want to be part of the collective exercise. And that's what I would like to add at this.
Thank you very much, General. I understand that Professor Nuno Severiano Teixeira would have to leave us, so maybe before giving the floor to Maria Raquel Freire, Professor Freire, I would give the floor to Professor Nuno Severiano Teixeira for this first round.
Thank you, Helena. Thank you. It was a very, very stimulating debate. I would like to continue with you because I have some questions to raise, but unfortunately I have really to leave. But if you allow me, just two comments. The first one on the relation between NATO and Russia. Of course, there are some areas of cooperation that are absolutely needed, but I am not so optimistic regarding this kind of relation after the clear violation of the international law with the annexation of Crimea. And more than this, the aggressive foreign policy of the against Europe in particular, against liberalism, against liberal order, and against the European institutions. So I think this kind of relationship, it's clear that we have to keep the channels open and continue the diplomatic dialogue. But we have to be aware that today Russia is a hostile regime to the Western world. The other question that I would like to raise is a question for our Turkish colleague, just to answer you, to question you, how do you see the current tension between Turkey and Greece, and how do you think if NATO can still play any role? And thank you again. It was my great pleasure, my great honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Nuno Severiano Teixeira. It was good to have you with us, and thank you for the questions. I have now a set of questions that some of the participants have already also directed to Professor Bagci. So there will be a lot of those. And before giving him the floor and recalling the questions that have been written, I will allow me to give the floor to a participant who has asked to intervene and to also put their questions and comments. That is Professor Luís Tomé. So I will give you the floor, and then we collect the other questions and throw back the debate.
Thank you, Helena. First of all, thank you very much for the excellent presentations by the distinguished speakers who enlightened us with much knowledge and a lot of to reflect on. Independently of a new strategic concept, I stress three aspects which I believe are crucial for the reorientation of NATO in the coming years, and which I would like to comment on later. First, NATO has to pay much more attention to its southern flank. So many years after the end of the Cold War and the Soviet Union's implosion, NATO remains too focused on the eastern flank, largely because of Russia's behavior, of course, but also because of the concerns and perspectives of the new members of the Atlantic Alliance, most of them from the Eastern Europe. But if NATO is to remain the pillar of Euro-Atlantic security, it needs to be able to project security and stability to its southern flank, that is the Mediterranean and the Middle East and North Africa, where many of the threats and risks to our own security come from. Conflicts, internal, international, proxy wars, fragile and collapsed states, terrorism and organized crime associated with trafficking persons, arms and drugs, multiple risks to economic and energy security, environmental security and human security. And to these must be added sectarian rivalries, interethnic, interreligious, regional power, great power disputes, and poverty and underdevelopment. Plus, the situation in the MENA region has provoked and facilitated a massive movement of migrants and refugees crossing the Mediterranean to reach Europe, pressure which in turn has helped to divide European countries and encourage the expansion of populist and nationalist movements. In other words, not only does the southern flank provide a myriad of threats and risks to our security, but other dilemmas affected the cohesion of European states and NATO countries. And in addition, our main strategic rivals, Russia and China, are gaining influence in the MENA region, which of course is not in our interest. It is vital to NATO to raise awareness and underline the increased relevance of the southern flank. This is not about creating new enemies and threats artificially to justify NATO's existence, but about recognizing the reality and contributing decisively to solving many of the problems that threaten our security in the region from which they come. My second point is to revitalize NATO as a political alliance. NATO's role as a political alliance is often forgotten and arguably underutilized. Consultation is an integral part of NATO's decision-making process, but also a precursor to getting there. Even absent an impending decision, it allows members to consult and cooperate on defense and security-related issues in order to solve problems and build trust. This is even more important today, not only because of the many divergences between US and European countries, but also because there are now two major European powers that are not members of the European Union, but are members of NATO, Turkey and UK. In other words, NATO is not only the main forum for transatlantic political dialogue, but also between US, Turkey and UK. So revitalize NATO as a political alliance is crucial. And finally, NATO needs to meet the China challenge. While China is not USSR and emerging bipolarity is not the old Cold War, our Western values remains, our interest in maintaining a liberal international order remains, and NATO remains the main transatlantic link and the cornerstone of the Euro-Atlantic security. Therefore, if NATO has been able to resist the disappearance of the former Soviet enemy and transform itself, it must be able to adapt itself to the powerful new challenge that China is, not with old and obsolete mental maps, strategies and solutions that will probably be highly inadequate, but with innovative policies and strategies that are truly appropriate to the contemporary context and challenges. And NATO is well suited to host discussions on the emerging challenge presented by China. Again, to be clear, this would not be a discussion on military options. Rather, members would share their experiences working with China, including with regard to the Chinese investments in critical infrastructure and telecommunications. They could then discuss what risks such investments might pose to their national and collective security, intelligence sharing, and political freedom of action. On the other hand, they might try to reach consensus on steps NATO, national governments, and other partners might take to determine malignant behavior and guard against any security risks. On the other hand, NATO should also be built upon as the main framework for dialogue and political articulation, not only between its members and close neighbors, but with other liberal democracies around the globe. What is at stake is not only the defense of the allies and the Euro-Atlantic security, but also the liberal international order. In sum and in the essence, NATO can and must become the center of a new concept of liberal democracies and guarantor of the liberal international order. So thank you, Helena.
Thank you, Professor Luís Tomé. I apologize, I missed returning the floor to Professor Maria Raquel Freire when we changed the order. So allow me to give her the floor briefly for that first round before I pass on the debate to the four participants who already asked to intervene.
No worries, Helena. I was just going to say basically that my perception from the four presentations was very much that we are in line with the idea that the main threats to NATO currently come from within, and that the major external threat keeps being Russia somehow, at least very close to NATO's borders. Regarding the issues that arose about Russia and how NATO should or could try to relate to Russia and what we have there in terms of Putin's regime, authoritarian regime, more conservative nationalist, and his rhetoric about how decadent this Western European order is. And so, and Luis was talking about the importance of this defending the liberal order. Clearly, Russia is not in this same track. And as General was making it very clear, this is making it very difficult for dialogue to be possible, because basically we are not talking the same language. And we are very far apart in terms of where we position ourselves. But saying this, I would just like to add my understanding that although Russia is a revisionist power and Russia wants to be recognized as a great power in the international system, it has many limitations to its actuation and to the way it is acting. And sometimes it seems to be punching a bit above its weight. And now with the pandemic and the even more pressure that Russia is facing in financial economic terms, clearly I wouldn't see Russia as this revisionist power that will just, you know, become an imperialist, territorialist oriented power, not in that sense, I would say. So I would be a bit more, I would have some more caution in terms of how we rate Russia in this regard. Of course, Russia is a relevant power, is powerful. It has military capabilities. Russia has been mobilizing some states to the east, so within the Collective Security Treaty Organization or even the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Russia tried somehow to create what some have been calling the NATOs of the East, so to try to have some collective multilateral frameworks dealing with security issues in a way to try to counterbalance NATO, but we know this is not even comparable in terms of capacities, in terms of even the collectives that we have there. So it's clearly an hostile regime regarding the Western world as currently it is, but I'm not really sure to which extent Russia would go also in provoking the West, let's say. It has been quite far, and of course Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea is unacceptable. It's a clear violation of international law, but it was difficult. It put NATO, it put the EU, it put the West in a very difficult position, but I have some doubts regarding the full capacity of Russia to go further in these regards. So whenever actions in what it considers its sphere of influence, because Russia still uses this kind of language, which is the post-Soviet space that it considers contrary to its interests, will happen, Russia will react. But more than that, as some have been putting forward, that Russia might think about invading the Baltics, or these kind of scenarios, I think, are a bit too dramatic, also in face of Russia's limits. I would say. So maybe I'll leave it for now. And
Thank you very much. I can see that there is a debate going on among participants themselves, which is great, because this is the good thing of these platforms. But since we will try to keep this as a round table and have comments and questions directed also to our panel, I would now give the floor and ask the four people who actually wrote questions to, if they will, put these questions very briefly, please, because some of you have already written them, so we can just check. But to make this a bit more active as a larger roundtable, I would give the floor in this order to the four participants who raised questions. First, Marco Marzilli, who raised questions directed to Professor Bagci, who already volunteered to answer them. Then Mohamed Ashiru, Raman Dag, and Luis Pinto. Okay, so please, Marco Marzilli, try please to make it brief and pose your questions, please. Your microphone is still off. You need to connect it.
Actually, I was trying to answer to Professor Celik, and I was writing, so I was not able to follow your words, your speech. So
I just asked you to very briefly. I'm giving the floor to four participants who raised questions, and I'm giving you the floor to ask you to briefly raise one or two of your questions.
Thanks very
and
much.
then
One was about Turkey. It's about the posture of the Turkish government on a couple of debated issues, among which there is the so-called Armenian genocide. This affects also the relations between Turkey and the European Union, namely France and Germany that passed resolutions recognizing the Armenian genocide. The position about Fethullah Gulen and its met, and the crackdown of political dissent, and the not independency of the judiciary, and the fact that the lower courts do not apply the rulings by the Constitutional Court. So it's a couple of after the invasion of Iraq to fight again with the excusation on grounds of fighting the terrorists that should be considered the Kurdish, but it's really it's a crackdown of the Kurdish dissent invading a foreign soil that is Iraq, while being part of a coalition that is the coalition against Daesh, in which Turkey is a partner, but in which NATO is a partner too.
Thank you, Marco, for raising the questions orally. Allow me to give the floor to the remaining three participants, and then I will send the debate back to the speakers in this panel. So Mohamed Ashiru, please.
Thank you very much for the opportunity given. Actually, my question is directed to Professor Bagci. He made a very good comment. I like his presentation a lot. He emphasized the fact that there are so many refugees in Turkey, and Turkey has been doing so much to keep them safe and under very good shelter and give them food. And my question is, how does he think Turkey is going to use this kind of power it wields by keeping these refugees to get the European Union do its bit? Like if there is something that Turkey wants from the European Union, does he think that Turkey can use its power of harboring so many refugees to get them do what it wants, unless Turkey wants nothing? I want his comment on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. A lot of questions that would quickly take us out of the focus of this panel, of course, but this is how things are, and questions raise interest on other similar topics. I will now give the floor to Raman Dag to pose the question, if we can.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me now?
Hi, hello. Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all the respected participants because they have raised really challenging arguments about the NATO. But I think I see that there's something is missing, because the declining of US leadership in NATO is actually now can be a fact that all the participants agreed. Is someone intervened? Hello?
It's okay, it's okay,
Can you
go
hear
on.
me now?
Yes, please go on.
Okay.
Yes, yes. Now your microphone is off. We need it
Okay.
on.
Can
Okay.
I speak now? Okay. Declining the role of the US in NATO actually is not leading to looking for alternate leadership. But for Europe, I think it gets some reactions that we need to find or build our own defense security or European army. So if it is declining or the reluctance of the US involving in the NATO, especially about the economic burden for almost half a century. So if the US keeps its reluctancy on paying all the burdens for NATO and the Europe, so what will the other member of the European states would react to this? It is going to be taking the role of the leadership instead of US, or just try to find alternative way apart from NATO to be rebuild their own army or the European defense security. I think it's already stopped.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I will now come back to the panel and starting with General Luis Valença Pinto, who is actually the Luis Pinto. I thought it was somebody else in the audience who had asked to make a comment, and then we'll go on. General Valença Pinto, your microphone, please.
On, I guess. Okay, I would like to make a comment. I'm sorry to come back on the question of the shift of priority of the United States from the Atlantic area to the Pacific. This is a reality, and it's not a reality of our specific times. It is a reality since the George W. Bush administration, then Obama, and there is nothing new on it with the Trump administration, regardless the terms in which, with whom it relates to the question. This problem, it is a reality, and NATO and we, the Europeans, have to live with that. And that's not the big problem. The big problem is the lack of answer. Because related with this shift of priorities, the Americans have risen, in my view, of course, in 2 points. First of all, we, the Europeans, need to spend more with defense. Second of all, and perhaps even more important, we, the Europeans, have to take greater responsibilities as to the security of our own continent and of our near abroad. Let me put things bluntly. With all its amazing military capabilities, standing alone, at this very moment, NATO is not able to ensure security to its southern members. Why? Because NATO has not the tools to fight the origin of the problems. NATO doesn't have the dimensions that exist in the European Union that are absolutely indispensable to tackle these questions, namely economic, financial, social, cultural, but also political and diplomatic. And that's why the value of NATO-European cooperations is so fundamental. The future of NATO also passes by the future of this NATO-European Union cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General Valença Pinto.
Helena,
oh,
may I just
yes,
make, before
sure.
You give the word to Huseyin, because it links, and I would also like to add something here. And following on what General Valença Pinto was just saying of how important is this issue about NATO-EU relations, and Luis may also emphasize this idea of NATO as a pillar of this liberal international order and of the values it entails. But we know that currently within NATO, we have some states that have been downgraded, let's say, in terms of their classification. So they are not anymore considered as liberal democracies. And I'm talking about Hungary, Poland, and Turkey. So in international indexes, etc. And on this I would, which of course brings an added layer of complexity to the already difficult internal cohesion within the Atlantic Alliance. So with all the questions that have already been asked to Huseyin, also how do you see these different values and different positionings in terms of values orientation and these regarding what democracy and fundamental rights entails in terms of Turkey's role also within NATO? Thank you so much.
Well, Professor Bagci, you have a long list of questions waiting to be answered, so please take the floor.
First of all, to General Pinto and Maria, concerning the value issue. As you know, Francis Fukuyama's latest book is about the illiberal democracies. So it is actually Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán who used this illiberal democracies concept. And in recent years, we have in America, in Russia, in Turkey, and in Hungary, political leadership, which is still a democratic in its structure, but having a different style of leading. Just yesterday in the United States of America's Congress, she was accusing Trump, this is America, not North Korea, not Turkey, not Russia whatsoever. So the question is here, the value orientation, what you said, and Mr. Pinto's statement that NATO is an organization of democratic values. Yes, of course, Turkey is, despite all the critics at the moment, is a democratic country with a lot of deficits, okay? So, of course, it would have been much better that Turkey would continue like in the early 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, where the European Union possible membership negotiations started. But who stopped this? It was French President Sarkozy who stopped the opening of the chapters. 8 chapters opened, 1 chapter is fulfilled, this is the science and technology, and all the others are stopped. How can you make progress if the other side stops the chapters? So one. The second, the European Union made a big mistake to take Southern Republic of Cyprus into European Union as a full member, despite the fact that the problem is not solved on Cyprus. Cyprus is not Greek only, it is according to 1960 treaty. Greece, Turkey, and Great Britain are the guarantee powers of this state. So all the diplomats, politicians, academics, they tell me at the international conferences, you know, Professor Bagci, European Union made a mistake, but sorry, we had to accept this because Greece made political blackmail to stop NATO enlargement in the 90s and to stop European Union enlargement. So what could you do if the other side is making political blackmail? You cannot do anything. Turkey has been in NATO since 1952, providing the entire Cold War years for the European security, suffered under this. And then Turkey is still out of the European Union. But NATO is a military organization. European Union is a democratic peace organization, as Immanuel Kant foresaw. Now, there is no war between Greece and Turkey. It is not possible, because if there is a war between two member countries, then NATO's philosophy does not exist anymore. You cannot have among your members military confrontation. The second one, Turkey is negotiating with the European Union for full membership. Southern Republic of Cyprus is part of the European Union, and they block. Turkey blocks southern Greece, Republic of Cyprus in NATO, and they stop Turkey in the European Union. I think the problem is here how in the coming years after pandemic, what type of conflicts do we have and how do we solve them? At the moment, the negotiations started once again, and it is good. So I can send to Louis Tome, and he can distribute to all of our friends. Today is already published two authors, one of them, it is me, the other one a Greek friend. We wrote two papers how to come back to normalization. It is published today by Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Berlin. We can send you the report, and it was distributed to 50 thousands of people are dead as migrants who try to reach Portugal, Spain, Italy, Turkey, Greece, whatsoever. It is the biggest graveyard. Thousands of the people lost their lives. And we see, actually, since a couple of years, this migration issue changed the entire philosophy of the European Union. Nobody forgot, of course, what happened to those Syrian refugees coming to Hungary, and the camera women were trying to stop this father and son. The pictures today tell more than we, the academics, can tell at the universities. Now, going back to Mr. Marsili's questions. First of all, Armenian genocide issue is a political issue. More than 50 countries worldwide recognize this, but it does not have any political impact. So the parliaments cannot decide whether a country has done it or not. Concrete example, the Polish parliament accepted this with 50 people. And the former Polish diplomat said to me, "Oh, Mr. Bagci, I'm sorry that we have 50 idiots," he said this, I quote, 50 idiots who passed this resolution. I said, then take care of your idiots. You cannot blame a nation as a killer. For this, we have to look to the entire history of the European countries, starting from Spain, France, Britain, Portugal, whatsoever. We have history with a lot of full blood killings, wars, whatsoever. But the Armenian genocide issue is a political issue used by certain countries against Turkey. I do not expect that any government in Turkey for now and for the next 1,000 years would accept any accusation concerning the genocide. It is not the case, because when the Ottoman Empire dissolved, and my family is coming from Bulgaria and father from Romania, what happened in the Balkans? More than 5 million Turks lost their lives within 150 years on the retreat from the Balkans back to Turkey. Justin McCarthy published about this. The question is always from which perspective you look. It is a political issue. Academically, we debate, we discuss, but it does not bring, I think, a lot. Another point. I think this invasion of Iraq. First of all, Turkey did not invite Iraq. This is wrong. It is the United States of America, 2003. Turkey has undertaken cross-border terrorism measures. 3 countries, Israel, Turkey, and India, signed a memorandum in order to fight cross-border terrorism. Why these 3 countries? Because they face cross-border terrorism. One is between Pakistan and India, the other one Palestine and Israel, and the other one Turkey and the PKK. Since 1985, Turkey lost more than 40,000 people, civilians and military. $350 billion to fight this. Turkey is the most experienced terror fighting country at the moment. It is something which is very difficult, very harsh, and we, as an academic, I can only tell you, with this $250 billion, if we wouldn't have this problem, probably Turkey would be one of the most prosperous countries in the European continent. Concerning the Syria and the presence of Turkey in Syria, the Kurdish PKK and the Syrian YPG, for the Turkish government, for the Turkish state, now I tell how the Turkish state observes this. For them, it is like 2 sides of the same coin. They have the same background and they do not deny it anyway. And the United States of America is sending a lot of weapons. They have now relations. Also, Bashar Assad talks to the Kurds. Turkey has undertaken three military operations in northern Syria. This is what makes Turkey also, of course, presence there. But you may not forget, according to Astana Treaty, Turkey, Russia, and Iran, they are obliged to prevent the territorial integrity of Syria. The Syrian civil war is a phenomenon where, as a result of Arab Spring, of course, we the Turks suffered mostly. I debate every day on Turkish television, press, conferences. It is not an easy thing, but everybody is there. Russia is there, America is there, England is there, France is there. I mean, look to Idlib. Idlib is like a, if you want, garbage of all radical forces. Who is going to clean up in Idlib? The Russians do. The Russians bombed like 2 days ago. And is there any reactions to this? Because the Russians have interest that those radicals should not become a threat for Russia. The thing is, if in Syria there is a peace, of course, Turkey cannot stay there. Then it is a different interpretation. Then Turkey would be an invading country. But at the moment, this is interesting. Turkey made use of Article 51 of the United Nations to protect her borders. The operation of Turkey, I can tell you, actually was foreseen 440 kilometers, but when it was 220 kilometers, because of the American pressure, they stopped. I tell you my personal experience with the former American president, deputy vice president, under George W. Bush. He said to me last year in Dubai, he said, Mr. Bagci, we are not going to leave the Middle East. We stay there. And the Russians now, our neighbors. Russia is Turkey's neighbors, and it has implications for NATO. So I think, will there be a Kurdish state, as somebody was asking? Probably it could be, as the Americans continue to support, but the question would be how much viable this state would be. Just 2 weeks ago, Mr. Nachivan Barzani from the northern Iraqi autonomous Kurdish region was in Turkey. Turkish planes fly to Erbil, to Süleymaniye. There is diplomatic relations. There are general consulates, and the Barzani people in general, they have been supporting Turkey in all those years against PKK, and PKK is defeated very strongly in Turkey, although the fact remains that there is a problem, even politically. But one point is important: the unmanned vehicles, drones, Turkey developed and used in northern Syrian operations. It changed the entire structure. Turkey is also in Libya at the moment. So we have suddenly in the Middle East as well as in the Mediterranean new situation. The United States of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Israel, Egypt, Greece, and the Southern Republic of Cyprus, they built a bloc against Turkey. The previous perception that the Arab countries were uniting themselves against Israel, now it changed, they against themselves against Turkey, except Qatar. Now, why I'm telling you this? The question is, Turkey as a NATO member and a negotiating country with the European Union is still integrated, is still there. It is not leaving to somewhere. But if there are anyone who can convince me why the Americans kicked out Turkey from F-35 project, Turkey paid the money. we have historical example in World War I. General Pinto maybe would know this much better. Turkey paid before World War II to Great Britain for 2 ships. Turkey paid the money and Britain didn't deliver. And what Turkey has done, and Turkey got Goeben and Breslau from the Germans and bombed the Russian shores, and World War I started and Turkey was on the side of the Germany. Now, the question is here, is there any country, I put the question now to the panel, is there any European country which would be militarily on the side of Greece and the Republic of Cyprus in a possible war against Turkey? Which country would dare to do this? This is a very open question. It will be not the case because in Europe, we do not have a unified concept. There are countries which have different views. Now, Germany is the balancer in this Mediterranean conflict. Germany undertakes as the president, of course, of the European Union, and Angela Merkel, the chancellor, calls every day Turkish president, we call it, Turkey plays now German card. Before, Germany was always supporting Turkey in all the European matters since 60s. Then in the last 15 years, it was Great Britain which supported. Now Great Britain is out and Germany is replacing as the advocate Great Britain's place. I can only tell you, the British, one of the British diplomats said to me, Mr. Bagci, whatever you do on the Mediterranean, you are right. We don't have any negative view. So from this perspective, the question is here, how to manage NATO, how to manage emerging crises, and how to manage Turkish position. Last but not least, of course, I'm not...
Shortly, please, Professor Bagci, we are reaching the end of our...
I'm not expert on Turkish domestic politics. In Turkey, maybe I'm the only academic who says, I don't make any comments on domestic politics because I was always wrong in my personal comments also. But in foreign policy, I can tell. Domestic politics, unfortunately, it is not enough time also. I cannot answer the domestic political questions, but if there is another platform, probably I could answer there. Thank you very much for your really good time giving and your wonderful moderation.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Bagci. We are reaching the end of the meeting, but not without giving a final word to the other 2 panel members. I would start, well, give the floor now to General Luís Valença Pinto, and then we would end this meeting with the final words of Professora Maria Raquel Freire. Senhor General. No.
It's only to thank everybody, and especially you, my dear friend, Professor Helena Carreiras, for your wonderful sharing, and all the participants for the lively debate. It was a little bit lateral, but these things happen. Thank you so much. See you all in the future occasion.
Thank you very much. Raquel.
I will also join Mr. General in thanking everyone. The debate, I think, was really rich and put on the table many issues. Of course, hot issues currently within NATO have a lot to do with Turkey and what is going on in the Mediterranean, and the discussion went a bit into that direction, which was very nice to have Huseyin with us and to get these insights from Turkey. I just hope that all these reflections about what could be a possible future strategic concept do end up leading to the approval at some point of a new strategic concept that will mean that there has been some form of finding some agreement, some form of redefining cohesiveness within the Atlantic Alliance, and that it is still there to stay. But let's see, because there are many question marks up in the air. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, everybody. I just have to say that it was wonderful to be chairing this distinguished panel. Even, of course, if all our discussions would take us to many other debates and roundtables, definitely. Allow me, on behalf of the organizers, to thank Professora Maria Raquel Freire, General Valenga Pinto, Professor Huseyin Bagci, and also Professor Nuno Severiano Teixeira, who had to leave us earlier. And of course, a warm thanks to all the participants. I apologize if not all the questions could have been addressed, but there is a very interesting debate going on. Thank you all for this very active participation. And this is where the panel finishes. I ask you to stay with us because there will be immediately after, right now, I guess, the closing session of this conference. So I will give the floor to, I believe, Professor Luís Tomé will take over from now. Thank you all.
Thank you, Helena. Osgur, would you like to say something before our rector? I think all the speakers of the closing session are already online, I guess.
Then first, I would like to thank to Professor Bagci, Professor Pinto, and Professor Freire for sharing their perspectives with us. And also, we are grateful to have you at this conference. And also, Professor Carreiras, thank you for moderating such a great panel. You know, in the opening session, I mentioned that the IEPAS2020 covers a wide array of topics. You know, now I can say that wholeheartedly, yes, indeed, it covered many issues in the Eurasian region. You know, we have started with a great speech of Professor Richard Sakwas on the international system and global order, and ended with the panel discussion on NATO's challenges in view of the future strategic concept. And also in between, we had another great panel on impacts of COVID-19 on Greater Eurasia, and a book discussion panel to find out the answers of why America in Afghanistan, based on Dr. Sharifullah Dorani's book, and also had many thought-provoking presentations during the conference. I would like to thank each participant for their time and great presentations, and also would like to thank Professor Jose Amado da Silva, Professor Jose Guilherme Victorino, Professor Luis Nuno Rodriguez, and especially Professor Luís Tomé and Professor Ana Isabel Javier, and also my colleagues and dear friends, Professor Rahman Dan and Professor Husret Tabak, for their valuable contributions, time, help, and understanding before and during the conference. I'm deeply grateful to have such a partnership with our Portuguese colleagues. That's why we agreed on to hold the 8th annual conference on Eurasian politics and society in Lisbon in September 2021, next year. Please stay tuned for the exact dates. And just a quick reminder, we will send each participant, a post-conference email, which includes your certificates and information about publication opportunities. And well, thank you for joining us once again, and hope to see you next year. Thank you very much.
Mr. Rector, please, the floor is yours.
The microphone should be on.
I prefer to hear than to speak now and then. It's fine. First of all, let me express my gratitude for everyone. Not forgetting the organizing committee and the international committee that has made their environment at this conference, and of course all participants. Let me first of all be grateful to our author board of the CEO for the always the supporting it is never denied for these organizations, and we are a private university. Don't forget that we must live with our own resources. We not eat at the table of the public debt, the budget of like the others, and it's why we must be very careful. And I recognize all the effort and all the equilibrium that is needed to support these things. Of course, I'm grateful for, and I want to be grateful to Oxford, to Factory for this announcing that tomorrow, like next year, if we meet again in living, I hope, because anyway, I have dived in all sessions. Now and then, I'm even to computers when I work in chat to try to hear something. I have dived in all of sections. I can assure you that everything, and I think that in fact some things things are better, but the others are we're missing something that I hope we find again out of next year. Of course to Luís Rodrigues, Professor Luís Rodrigues, for the cooperation we have always. And don't forget, it was my first school. I was one of the founders of Extend in 72, 73. I would not say that because now you've said that this old guy that maybe are speaking very much. But let me be grateful, of course, for everyone, for either presentators of the presentations, either the discussions, and I have dived in some discussions, and I think they were very, very live. And in online, it's very important that the discussion be live. To try to substitute in any way the absence of face-to-face, and otherwise we are here, each one in its chair. It's not interesting. Then you're complete chat. I always dive all in chat as well to see what is going on, and I think that we have achieved what is possible to achieve in these circumstances, and I'm grateful, and I'm to all of you. Let me say another thing. I have learned much things, and I'm full of doubts, which means that I've learned. I don't know, but I've learned. And when we learn it, the first thing we learn is I don't know. When we think we know, we don't learn anything. It's why, and let me not quote, but pick an idea that one of the speakers had put in one of the last sessions about the relations between the European Union and the other countries. And we are here not to teach anyone. We are here to learn with each other. Otherwise, there's nothing. We can build, and I feel and I felt this diversity of opinions, of cultures, of even of shocks now and then. Why not? Provided that this means that diversity is the real path to tolerance and for unity. Thank you all.
So, Guilherme Vitrino, on behalf of the University's Management Board, please.
Well, thank you, Professor Tomer. Well, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to you all. Once again, I would like to express my sincere congratulations to the promoters of this conference. As our rector emphasized at the opening session, it was indeed an extremely important and very well succeeded forum of discussion about topics and realities that are affecting us all. On behalf of CEU, we were very pleased and honored by your presence, and of course I have to thank all the splendid efforts made by the organizing committee of IEPAS2020, namely Professors Osgur Tufekci, Luís Nuno Rodrigues and Luís Tomé. So thank you all very much. I wish you all the best, and I hope to see you next time in Lisbon. Thank you.
Thank you. Luís Nuno Rodrigues, on behalf of our partner, Center for International Studies of ISCTE Lisbon, please, floor yours.
Thank you very much, Luís. And I just very brief closing remarks, just again on behalf of the Center for International Studies at ISCTE. I would like to express my gratitude to all participants, speakers, moderators, and the audience who have indeed come together here in our virtual rooms, coming from various countries at different time zones, but united in this common desire to learn and to share knowledge and to think about the major problems in Eurasian politics and society. Even if, as Professor Amado, our rector, has just said, sometimes we finish with more questions than answers. But the ability to search for questions is in the academy as important as the ability to search for answers. So thank you for your participation, which enabled us to conduct what I think was a very fruitful conference. And as I said in my opening statement, again, it's an honor for us to be partners with such prestigious institutions, especially SESRAM and of course Universidade Autónoma Observari in particular. And if I may, I also would like to give a special word for Luís Tomé and Ozgur Tufek, and with these two names, of course, including their respective teams for their commitment and their energy in organizing this year's edition of IEPAS. And I will leave with the word of hope, hope in the future, and the hope that in the near future we will be able to come together again, but this time in person, and preferably in the beautiful settings of the city of Lisbon. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you all next year.
Thank you, Luís. And after 2.5 days of work and debates, I don't want to take you too long, but on behalf of Observatório Foreign Relations of Universidade Autónoma de Lisboa, I'd like to renew our gratitude to co-organizer, the Center for Strategic Research and Analysis, to our partner Center for International Studies of ISCTE Lisbon, and to all the participants in this conference. In my view, in our view, IEPAS2020 was a very significant and productive scientific event, not only because it was truly international, but also because of the thematic diversity and the high quality of communications and discussions. So thank you very much for your precious contribution. IEPAS2020 is about to end, but as you know, it is the co-organizers' expectation that many of the papers give place to scientific articles for publication in the journals published by SESRAM, Observari, and ISCTE, or in essays to an edited book. Therefore, I'd like to invite you to submit your papers for publication with us. It was an honor for Observari to co-organize this conference with SESRAM in partnership with ISCTE, and it will be a privilege to join forces again next year. We expect to hold the IEPAS2020 in person here in Lisbon, and all the participants of the IEPAS2020 are of course invited to come next year. You will always be welcomed, knowing that you have now new friends and colleagues here, also in Portugal. So thank you, and we'll see you next time. Ozgur, I don't know if you would like to add something to close the session online.
I don't know what can I add after you. You know, that was a great achievement, as you said, and I'm deeply grateful for having us in this online session. Thank you for your efforts. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. See
Bye.
you.
See you.
Bye.